Hi, I'm Juan Martinez, Senior Editor at the Harvard Business Review. Welcome to the Accenture Research Executive Briefing. AI is often framed as a tool that helps companies operate better, but Accenture's latest Consumer Pulse research argues something more profound. AI is starting to change how consumers decide. Based on a survey of 25,590 consumers across 16 countries, supplemented by qualitative interviews and additional hypothesis testing, the research finds that consumers are not just using AI to search. They are beginning to delegate tasks, choices, and parts of the relationship with brands to AI agents. That creates a new market reality. Brands are no longer speaking only to customers. They also need to be understood, evaluated, and recommended by the agents acting on consumers' behalf. The point of competition is moving upstream to the decision layer, and value built on friction, habit, or confusion is being exposed. Today, I'm joined by Jen Ducarre, Senior Manager of Accenture Research and the lead researcher behind the study. And I'm joined by Oliver Wright, Senior Managing Director of Accenture's Industry and Enterprise Group, focused on consumer goods and retail. He leads Accenture's thinking on what this means for business leaders. Together, they co-authored Talk to My AI Agent, The New Rules of Brand Value, the 2026 edition of Accenture's Consumer Pulse Research. Jen, Oliver, thank you for being here.
Great to be here.
Thanks for having us, Juan.
Jen, you've been studying AI, consumers, and brands through the Consumer Pulse for several years now. The story always changes, obviously, but where are we now? What is the 2026 story?
That's absolutely right, Juan. And Oliver and I have been doing Consumer Pulse for 7 years now, but studying the relationship between brands, the consumer, and AI for about 3 years. And I think what's really interesting that time frame is we went from 3 years ago standing here sort of a little bit surprised about what AI is and who is using it, to actually a world where this has become mainstream. What we're seeing nowadays is that 57% of consumers globally use generative AI at least once a week. It is already the #1 go-to discovery channel for those active users. But beyond that, what really surprised us in this year's research is that consumers are starting to develop the level of trust that means they would actually let an AI agent make shopping decisions and take actions on their behalf. In fact, 74% of consumers overall told us that they would trust an AI agent even more than their best friend to make a particular type of purchase for us. Now, that might say something about our best friends, but I think this is the kind of stat that 3 years ago we would have never imagined coming across.
Oliver, what do you think?
It's clear from the research and what we're observing in the market that the degree to which agents and how humans collaborate with agents is already fundamentally disrupting consumption. So this is a trend that is already here. And if you look at the degree to which this is happening in the West, it's been far surpassed already by what we're seeing in China and in India, where you've got adoption rates where people are saying it's their most preferred tool. In China, it's in the high 90s. In India, it's around 90%. So if you think about those as leading where we see consumption going, in effect, the use of agents to drive how consumption is going to take place is already here. It just hasn't got to scale yet in the West.
One of the biggest things that stood out to me in the report is that consumers are letting AI agents act on their behalf. So, Jen, is this about them giving up control, or are they allowing just full autonomy? How is this sort of changing?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think consumers, as we know them, are going to disappear. I think consumers are still very much in the driving seat. But the question is when they do and when they don't delegate to agents. So we introduced this idea of the delegation dial. And essentially what we see is that in some circumstances, consumers are much more ready to let an AI agent take control, whether that is carrying out a specific activity across the consumer journey or making a purchase decision on their behalf. And in other circumstances, consumers still really want to be involved. And I think one of the examples that came out of our interviews that really resonated with me was a consumer who said that, I would absolutely give full autonomy for my weekly grocery shop. I don't really enjoy that. It's hassle. Very happy for an agent to pick that up. But hey, I actually still want to go to the farmer's market on a Sunday. That's my me time. I like to touch the food, smell the food, taste the food. It gives me joy. And I think this speaks to something fundamentally human. I think we want to give up control when something feels like hassle, even if it's something highly complex, by the way, or even expensive. But we want to stay very much involved for decisions that are about joy or identity, or where we feel an emotional connection to the purchase we're making.
Oliver, what about you? You going to go to the farmer's market, or are you going to let an agent do it for you?
Yeah, no, I'm definitely still going to the farmers market. But what's clear is that we are seeing consumers move through from using this as a tool to understand what they could buy, all the way through to actually this growing number of consumers that are saying, I'm willing to have it fully transact on my behalf. And the trend that we expect to happen is that movement towards people allowing the AI, based upon their search histories, their preferences, and so on, to do more and more and more of that transaction on that behalf. That is the trend that we fully expect to become more and more of the norm over time. But we absolutely, to Jen's point, there are clearly a lot of retail experiences that bring consumers joy, and the quality of the experience, the interactions they have with folks in store, etc., are clearly going to be even more important as a driver of where consumers seek to go than they ever have been in the past. That retail experience is going to become even more vital.
I'll be honest with you. I read about this stuff all day, every day. People are constantly talking to me about it, but I don't have any agent shopping for me right now. So what do you think the biggest barriers to consumer adoption are? Jen, why don't we start with you on that one?
One of the biggest barriers is this doesn't exist in a perfect format in most countries, right? So, we see a real progression in markets like the US, where you've got trials such as ChatGPT agent, Meta agent, who can go through and do a purchase journey on your behalf and then let you make the purchase. We also see some even more fantastic examples in China and India. We might talk to some of those in a moment, but I think that, fundamentally, what we're seeing in our study is that consumers are ready ahead of technology. We see that 74% of us are saying that we would let an agent take an action on our behalf at least one stage of the journey. 32% are saying we would let the agent decide what to buy for us, but that we want to make the payment. And I think as this does take off, I think what we're seeing in our research is payment is actually one of the biggest barriers here, autonomous payments. Our research shows that only 12% of consumers overall would be comfortable with the idea of letting an AI agent make a purchase, make the payment for them. So many would let them make the purchase decision, only 12% would let them make the actual purchase. I think we're starting to see solutions such as Visa Intelligent Commerce emerge in this place, but they really have to earn consumer trust. They have to earn consumer trust through having the right protections in place. What happens if something goes wrong? Who's responsible? The ability for consumers to override the decision, and other solutions such as thinking about things like cat wallets, right? So the agent can only go ahead and spend so much. So I think that's going to be the big unlock here, is getting autonomous payments right. What I would say is I think once we do get this right, I think this could take off very quickly. So more than 1 in 3 consumers told us that actually if they have success with a low cost, low stakes purchase, then they would be willing to let an AI agent go and buy a lot more for them and even consider higher cost, more complex purchases as well. So lots to be done in this space, but I think, really we're seeing the consumer demand is emerging as people realize just how good AI can be.
Yeah.
Oliver, let's stick with you for a second there. This seems unusual to me that consumer demand would outpace organizational readiness. Oftentimes the technology is ready and sitting there. Can you talk me through that a little bit? It seems very interesting.
Yeah, I think it's useful to look at a signpost in terms of what's happening in in China and in India as an indication of where things are going, and then contrast that to why it's a little bit lagging in the West. So in China, if you can look at an example like Alibaba, where they've created a more integrated end-to-end model to support this, and I think that end-to-end point is vital. So a Chinese consumer can go on Quen, which is Alibaba's language model. They can order bubble tea near the office. Quen can identify the best merchant. It can place the order through Taobao Instant Commerce, and it can find and apply any available discounts and then complete the transaction through Alipay after, obviously, as Jen was saying, the user explicitly saying, go ahead and make the transaction. But that's a very seamless process. But what Ali have done is they've connected all of those different pieces together to make the experience pain-free for the consumer and intuitive, right? Similarly, Reliance in India is looking at a similar sort of model. So a consumer in India can, in Mumbai, can use Zhao AI, the Reliance model, and say, I want to order masala chai and samosas near the office. They can identify a vendor using the Zhao POS system, place the order on Zhao Mart, and then apply discounts from the Zhao rewards ecosystem, and then complete the transaction via Zhao payments. Again, all with this AI-based related chat and within the Reliance system. So what you've got is examples of players where they have explicitly tried to integrate together technologies to make it a seamless experience for consumers. But we don't have in the West, say in the US as an example, that level of integrated apps that can make that journey as seamless as that. And so for Western consumers, as Jen's saying, people who want to start to already work in this way, the ability to knit those pieces together in the way that is already happening and already been used at scale in both China and India is just not there yet. We've got to get that ecosystem of players. And so what we're seeing with our clients is a very different level of thinking about the level of collaboration that the movement towards agentic commerce is going to actually drive. And it's driving a level of industry conversation around things like standards and collaboration that we've not seen before.
Jen, let me ask you this, because it seems that we're back sort of in the search era of you have the consumer that is your audience, but you also have the agent. Oliver just spoke about this long process of purchasing something on Alibaba, but the first thing you do is you talk to the agent, right? And the agent goes and finds the products for you. So we're back in this stage where we have two audiences now, right? We have the consumer and we have the agent that brands need to impress in order to sell products. Is that right?
That's absolutely true. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that clients actually make here is thinking about agentic commerce as just another channel, something like moving to social or the various channel e-commerce, the various channel shifts we've had in the past. This is fundamentally different because it changes who is making the purchase decision or what is making the purchase decision. So all of a sudden, brands have to cater to two different audiences, and they act in very different ways. They need to cater to humans, where upstream brand building still really matters. It's still incredibly important for creating that emotional connection, that trust. In the same way, in-store experiences are still incredibly important. I think those moments of human connection are going to become fewer. So that means that you need to do them even better than before. And at the same time, brands need to figure out how to sell to machines. Now, machines are fundamentally different from human beings. They are much more logical than us. They are not going to care about historic branding. They are not going to be persuaded by tactics such as pop-up windows or last-minute offers. So fundamentally, it takes a very different approach. And one of the things that we think about a lot is actually how do you appeal to machines? And I think there's a couple of things that matter. One is in the quality of your offerings and the attributes. The brands who win here are the ones who can really demonstrate that they have the best offerings, both in terms of what they're building, but also in terms of the information that they're putting out there in order to become the authority and to show up in machine readable formats. At the same time, they have to prove claims. So we see, for example, that user reviews have become incredibly important. In fact, there was a fantastic study done by Yale and Columbia. They created some AI agents. They let them go out and shop autonomously, and they monitored how they acted, and they actually found that not only were they more likely to go for brands that had a significant volume of trusted user reviews, but actually they would pay a higher price point for those brands as well. So human trust becomes incredibly important. But the other thing is consistency. And this is one of the things that we highlight in our report. I think brands and organizations are only as good as their last point of failure. Because if the agent makes a promise to a consumer and the brand fails to deliver, then not only does the agent look bad in the eyes of the consumer, but the brand looks bad in the eyes of the consumer. The brand looks bad in the eyes of the agent. And I would expect agents to be much more unforgiving in these circumstances. So actually, this really delivers a strong imperative for brands to not just have better products, to not just be able to prove that they're good, but also to have consistent performance time and time again.
Oliver, that sounds like a lot of work. Where do we start with that? How do we get this process off the ground?
Yeah, I think there is again, I'm going to go back to the kind of the big takeaway here of this is thinking about this end to end. So if you are a brand player, we've got to think about how are you showing up on all of the large language models. You've got to think about how you're going to be showing up on the interactive tools that retailers are providing. You've got to think about how you're going to show up in terms of actual availability, and obviously underpinning this, as Jen's saying, this absolutely clear focus on the level of value and really true quality of the product itself. And what we're finding when companies are reviewing the quality of information that they are providing right now that can feed into language models, many are finding that as much as half of the information that language models actually need, they're not currently providing. So there is a bit of a gold rush, or a kind of a rush across industry right now to really get themselves well prepared to support that end-to-end journey and to provide the sort of insight that allows the models to make those really informed decisions for consumers.
Oliver, it seems like the decision layer there is one of the most important. Well, it probably is the most important part of this whole thing. It seems like people are going to have to change how they sort of organize their business when they approach consumers because the decision layer is changing. So talk to me about value and how that's going to sort of adapt itself within the decision layer with these agents.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that are useful here, Juan. One is, I think what people are realizing is the persuasive power of these language models. So let me just give you an example. We've been working with one of the very large grocers, and what we said to them was, let's describe, as you think about a consumer moving to a new market, if they use this tool, how would you actually show up on this? How compelled would they be to continue to shop with you? So what we did with the model is we said, look, let's use an example of a consumer who's moving to the Atlanta market. They've got an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old. Husband works in construction. The mother is actually putting the information in to work out, having now moved where they should shop. And what they asked the model is, what should I actually do? Historically, I've been a shopper, a customer of this particular grocery chain, and the model comes back and says, if you could continue to shop where you've been shopping before you moved to Atlanta, but actually thinking about what your likely weekly shop is going to be, we would actually suggest that you shop at these particular outlets instead. And we then said to the person, okay, well, to mother, well, then put in what the implications would be for you if you actually stayed with the chain that you've shopped with in the market that you were there before. And what the model came back with is, yes, you could obviously do that. But if you stay with that weekly shop, if you just make the decision to do that, it will cost you about $1,800 more a year. And that's the equivalent of you taking your family to Disney World for 4 to 5 days. And so it's this combination of making it very easy for the consumer to understand, but really vitally putting it in emotionally engaging terms that makes it very persuasive for the consumer to actually make the decision in that way. And it's this combination, as Jen was saying, about the quality of the insight actually really truly helping the consumer make a smarter decision, but also putting it in a way that's emotionally engaging, treating it very much as a companion or a friend that makes it a very compelling thing. And it's that combination of I'm getting better insight and I'm getting that insight in a way that resonates with me that's really causing the scale of the shift in consumption towards the use of agents being so persuasive in the way that they are.
Well, and that's the thing about the report that's great, right? It proves that out. There's data to back this up. We're not just talking about this vague idea of the consumer. You spoke to consumers. So, Jennifer, can you tell me a little bit about what the data bears on this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the most interesting statistics that we have from the report is that actually 63% of consumers told us that they want AI agents to shop for their idealized self, not their real self, right? Now, that can mean a number of different things. It can mean that I want the AI agent to be less impulsive than me, or I want the AI agent to be more budget conscious than me. But at the same time, it can also mean I want it to be a healthier version of myself, or even a more aspirational version of myself. And this is going to have a significant impact on value creation in a number of ways. I mean, one of the things that we have to be aware of is that loyalty built on friction is going to disappear, right? So think about things like overconsumption, or people sticking with the same contract time and time again because it's the easy thing to do. That kind of value can no longer be assumed. But at the same time, there's a huge opportunity here for brands to create more value. So the positioning, the healthier brand, the more aspirational brand. But I think those who are really going to succeed here are those who can create the holistic solutions. And this is where we need to think about who consumers are. Consumers increasingly should be thought about not just about consumer context, but also shopper intent. We've seen some nice examples already, like Walmart Sparky, where a consumer can go in and say, rather than find me, some beers or a pack of Doritos, find me everything that I need for a football watch party. And actually, Walmart have reported that those who use Walmart Sparky have an increase in basket size by 35%. Now, we see that in our own research as well. A significant proportion of shoppers are saying that, they've bought more add-on items when using AI. I think the other thing we should think about here is also that aspirational side of things. Our research shows that already 26% of weekly users tell us that they have spent more than they would have done otherwise whilst using AI. And we saw that during the holiday shopping period, that actually, brands like consumer electronics were seeing higher price points or products at higher price points being bought by those who are using AI. And I think often there is a fear here that AI is just going to lead to commoditization. I don't think that's true. I think for those who get this right, who build the right products, who build the right holistic solutions, I think there's actually a huge opportunity to generate additional value in this space.
Yeah.
One word I didn't hear you say in that answer is brand, right? Are the days of the big advertising campaign where we try to tug at people's heartstrings, is that over? Are we now just going based on specs and customer reviews and price? If I ask ChatGPT to find a TV for me, I don't care that the commercial had, a small child with his grandparent at Christmas. I want the cheapest TV at 4K. Go find it for me. So that's it, right? Brands are dead.
I mean, everyone loves to say that, and I cannot tell you, Juan, how many times I get this question from clients: are brands now dead? Now, I very much believe in brands, not just because I love brands, but also because of what the data is telling us. Now, 56% of consumers have told us that they would instruct their AI agent on which brands to consider for a specific category. So let me break out what that means in practice. That's the difference between saying, go ahead and find me the perfect holiday under $2,000 for a family of 4, versus go ahead and find me the perfect holiday. Maybe I don't care who the airline is, but actually you can choose the hotel, but it has to be a Marriott hotel. Right now, that's a very different conversation. And 56% of us are saying that's the kind of conversation I'm going to have with the agent. I'm going to tell them which brand to consider. So brands really matter. On the flip side, having said that, what we also see in our research is that 37% of behaviorally loyal consumers told us they would let an AI agent switch brands. Now, let's just break down what behaviorally loyal means, right? That is individuals who tell us that for a particular category, they always choose between 1 to 3 of the same brands every single time. I always go for the same toothpaste. I always go for the same shampoo. I always go for the same lipstick. But actually, we're saying, no, forget what I go for. You can go ahead and choose something different. And why does this matter? Well, I think what we're going to see play out in this world is that habitual loyalty or lazy loyalty is no longer enough. When that's the case, consumers are going to let the agent switch. Whereas loyalty built on real, meaningful love for the brand, that still very much holds strong. So yes, brands matter, but they have to earn the love. They have to earn the right to matter rather than just assuming consumer loyalty.
How do you do that in an agentic world, Oliver? It seems hard now. It seems more difficult now to earn that loyalty and that trust based off of 60-second spots when you're dealing with an agent. Talk me through that.
Yeah, I think that the big thing here, and it again built on what Jen said, is about that true expression of quality, because people have gone to brands because it is a known quantity, a known quality that they can trust. And what brands need to do is ensure that the actual true quality, the trade-off between the price that a consumer has to pay and what they're getting out of it, really, really stands up. Because we do think that what AI is going to do is herald this movement towards better consumption. That is, as Jen said, it's going to squeeze out areas where, candidly, either the lack of time that consumers have or the lack of consumer understanding, it's going to squeeze out all of that lost value that goes to consumers today and actually get it into the pockets of consumers. So we do fundamentally believe that this is going to drive better consumption. So what this is going to mean on the quality side is a broad review across the portfolios of all of the big CPGs and obviously the retailers that make product, to actually say, when we take a really hard look at the quality of our face cream, at the quality of the detergents that we're creating, etc., do they really truly stack up? Because if they don't, AI will find that out and will encourage consumers to switch. So we do think this is going to herald, and we're already starting to see this, a huge resurgence and huge focus on the quality and the speed of R&D processes. The other thing that I think is coming through from this is it is massively highlighting the degree to which companies really need to understand consumers at a different level of intimacy and a different level of frequency than they've had before. And what I mean by that is what this is exposing across companies is that they now, there's a deepening belief that they don't understand consumers as well as they should. And because these movements are happening so fast, I mean, these movements are now happening month to month, not year to year or across years as they used to, that huge step up in a focus and investment in understanding consumers and consumer trends and how consumers are using these tools, including the use of synthetic consumers, is something that now is really exploding as a focus across organizations, again, both on the retail side and on the manufacturer side.
Can you talk a little bit about the synthetic consumer a little bit more and just tell us how that's being used?
Yeah, so what people are doing is they are creating AI versions of their consumer population. And what you can do is, if once you've established that, so you're putting in all of the parameters, all the things that you know about your consumers, that can include all of the email interactions with them, customer service issues, etc. And what you're doing is you're creating an AI version that is the best facsimile of your real consumers. So rather, if you think about what will have happened historically, is we would have put surveys out, we'd have done panels, etc. And those things are still important, don't get me wrong. But now what we've also got is the ability to create an AI version of a particular type of consumer that we can ask questions of real time to refine proposition. So we're now, as we're driving R&D and we're testing out propositions on taste or look and feel and so on, we can now actively spar with a consumer who represents exactly who the buying population is. And obviously you can tailor those by geography, you can tailor those by demographic, etc. And that's something, again, that we see becoming a norm across the industry.
I would just add to that. I think the accuracy we're seeing of these synthetic consumers when it comes to things like proposition development and testing is staggering. We're seeing 80 to 90% directional accuracy versus a real consumer panel, which is incredible.
One other thing about that that's interesting is that sometimes people, when they're talking to an interviewer in a panel, may be inclined to say what they want the consumer to, what they want the panel answerer to say. With an AI synthetic, they are much more impartial. They're going to really think much more about what that end consumer is going to look like. And so again, sometimes you'll get a higher level of accuracy of what the consumer really truly wants because of that synthetic view.
If there were a synthetic version of Juan Martinez, it would order the beer and Doritos that Jen talked about earlier all the time. But he would not be ordering a John Deere tractor or ERP software for a 5,000 person organization. So is this all going to change everything in the same way? Are these larger purchases going to be a different type of agent? I just don't see how we get from Doritos to tractors. Like, walk me through that.
You know what? I think every industry is going to be impacted. I think every industry is going to see different types of impact. Purely from the consumer perspective, we expected to see a significant difference by category in terms of readiness for delegation. Actually, a surprising finding was we only saw between a 0 to 10 percentage point difference by category across the different levels of delegation that we looked at. But nonetheless, we will see a difference by category. And what the research shows us is that when it comes to those purchases that are perhaps relatively boring, but relatively complex that we have to do frequently, things like switching utilities provider or switching telco provider or insurance provider, this is the most ready for delegation across any area. So whether that's saying I want to collaborate with a chatbot to find the solution, or I just want fully autonomous shopping, that's the top use case. Now, aside from that, I think we see some interesting differences in human behavior. So when it comes to things like travel or fashion, we see that consumers are especially ready to collaborate with AI agents. In fact, they want to do this more than something like groceries. It kind of makes sense, huh? I want to have a conversation. It's a little bit more complex. Help me with the discovery process, right? But their desire for delegation is a little bit lower. Whereas if we look at something like routine purchases like groceries, that equation flips. So when it comes to grocery shopping, we've got less inclination to collaborate with a chatbot, but we are more inclined to delegate the purchase. And what that means is I think that some of the categories that have maybe had less disruption to date from AI discovery are going to be the ones that see more disruption as this moves from discovery through to delegation.
Oliver, how do you figure out where you are, though? How do you figure out, how much delegation customers want? How do you figure out how much autonomy your consumers want before you go and try to build out this whole ecosystem?
Yeah, and I think, Juan, I think there's going to be an element of this of that direct engagement with consumers and with folks across the ecosystem. So as I was mentioning earlier, what we are seeing clearly is folks is CPGs saying we need to directly engage with retailers. We need to directly engage with Walmart. We need to directly engage with Amazon around these topics to really understand that and to think about how that full end-to-end journey is actually going to work. Because as Jen said, there is, whilst the variations are not as big as we thought they might be in the research, there are clearly some, and it does vary very clearly through what that purchase journey looks like. But it's that level of focus on the end-to-end, and what we're now seeing companies looking to do is to make sure that they've got folks within the organization who are point accountable for that clear end-to-end experience. So thinking about that entire customer journey and who they will engage with. It's one of the best examples that we're seeing of how the overall industry is moving more and more clearly towards end-to-end thinking.
I didn't hear the word customer centricity, customer journey. I didn't really hear those terms that we've been using for the past 15 to 20 years didn't come up in that discussion there. So we don't have to think about customer centricity anymore. Are we done with that? Is it agent centricity that we need now? I'm coining that phrase, by the way. I want everybody to know that, unless somebody has already used it, in which case I'm sorry.
When I think that what I'm implying when I talk about end to end is it's absolutely about that consumer or that customer. I mean, you are looking at every single point from how they're engaging in the language models initially, all the way through to any sort of post-purchasing support that's going to be required. And I think that, again, the point that I'm making about this kind of a bit of this rush in the West to catch up with the level of integration that we're already seeing in China and India is going to require people to think in that very much that holistic way. And again, back to the point, consumers are clearly ready for this, but we do not have the level of integration in that whole end-to-end shopping experience that supports where consumers are going. So the big lesson, I think, for manufacturers and retailers here is, if you can be amongst the first to be able to provide that experience, if you're going to be on the manufacturing side, if you're amongst the first to make sure that your data, the information that you're providing to language models and to retailers, gives you that superior response rate on models. If you're a retailer that's able to have that level of rapid demand response when these questions come up and actually be able to fulfill purchasing, you are going to drive increased market share, because the models will recognize that's the case. Because even if your product is the better product, if it's not available to be checked out and to be delivered, you're going to lose, right? So that end-to-end connection, that end-to-end thinking is absolutely vital. And that's where the industry really needs to go.
Jennifer, in your conversations and in compiling the report, did you get the sense that there is a groundswell of opportunity for that level of customer centricity within the agent ecosystem?
I think absolutely. And I think, we've been talking about customer centricity forever. I think the difference here is that the imperative is so much stronger. Now our customers can include both human consumers and the agents. But I think what we see consistently throughout our research is that the demands are just getting higher and higher and higher as a result of agentic commerce. So really, this is the time where organizations have to react. They have to prove that consumer centricity at every stage of the journey, else they are going to get left behind. I think one key consideration there is, I don't think the consumer promise is just the CMO's problem anymore. It has to be an organizational problem and an organizational solution to solve for it.
And Juan, I think this is something that is a useful takeaway as well. There will be those on the corporate side listening to this who will be thinking, oh, well, this should really be something that the CMO's got to get after. To the point, it's going to link to how, when sales teams on the CPG side are visiting a retailer, they're going to collaborate here to actually make sure that in the models that are being used, the agents that are being developed by retailers, that they show up in the right way. It's going to have a big impact on the supply chain to ensure that product availability at the time that's required. And again, so this is one of those examples where there's going to need to be a coordination across the full range of functions in companies to be able to meet this demand, which is something historically that's been really difficult for organizations to do. Those that can do this well are going to increase market share. And again, back to that fundamental end-to-end message.
Those that are going to do this well, that's the key topic. That's the key phrase, right? There's a lot happening there. Let's assume all of the people at Accenture watch this, they bring it to their clients, the clients follow their advice, everything is working smoothly, the consumers adopt it the way the report said consumers are going to adopt it. 5 years from now, what does this look like?
Fine, let me pick this one up. I think there's a couple of things that I think are really going to be interesting here. One is, we do have this hypothesis that as we go forward 5 years, we will be in a world fundamentally of better consumption. Not just cheaper and more value conscious consumption, but better consumption. And again, let me use an example of this. I'll describe it as the mattress problem. So mattresses are an expensive thing to buy. People, typically replace their mattresses about every 10 years. They'll often go into a store with a price point in mind, and they will say, look, I want to spend $500 on a mattress. What's the best one I can get available for that, right? This is an example where AI can be used to say, actually, let's think about, can we persuade the consumer to make that better decision, not just a cheaper decision, to your 4K TV point earlier, but actually a better decision? And what we can say here is, the typical consumer in a 10-year lifespan spends about 230,000 hours in bed, right? So they are using this product a lot, right? And if they think about the quality difference between a $500 mattress and an $800 mattress, that can have a huge impact on the quality of their sleep over those 10 years. But when they're going into the store, the consumer may not be as conscious of that distinction, right? But if you look at that over the 10-year lifespan of the mattress, they're only saving about $1.50 a month. So what the AI can do is it can say to the consumer, do you understand how much you're going to use in this purchase? Do you understand the amount of money that you're really saving over the lifespan of the product? And do you understand that typically, if you buy a $500 mattress, a lot of people report back issues after a year and a half or 2 years of using the mattress. However, if you move to an $800 mattress, you won't see some of those same sorts of issues. So we would, as your trusted companion, suggest that you actually move to something that's more expensive than you were originally thinking, but as your friend, as your trusted digital companion, we think this is the right decision. And so what we're expecting is that it really will herald an era where we are seeing truly better consumption, and that's something we're really hopeful about.
Jen, as someone who spent 230 hours in bed just last weekend, I'm still confused about which agents are doing what. Is my Nike agent buying Nike shoes for me? Is my ChatGPT agent buying Nike's, Pumas, and Timberlands for me? I think the phrase is what? Agent of choice, choice of agent. I've talked about this on other calls with Accenture executives. Walk me through that.
One of the most surprising stats of the study is we found that consumers were more than 2.8 times as likely to trust a retailer or a brand to own an AI agent than to trust an AI native platform to do so.
How do we extrapolate that to the next 5 years? What does that mean for how we're building these and how we're sort of managing that customer-centric journey that we were talking about before?
Yeah, and I think this is going to be a kind of key consideration over the next 5 years. And I think, what the real question is going to be is where is this going to play out? I think we're going to see a mix of different agents. I think we're going to see some at the general level, owned by players such as ChatGPT, Perplexity, DeepSeek. And at the same time, I think there's a real opportunity here for agents that are owned by retail marketplaces and brands to really come to the forefront. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion yet in terms of who is going to win or where consumers are going to turn to. But I think in the short term, we're going to see a variety of players appearing in the marketplace.
Oliver, I noticed you nodding very, very vigorously. Is there something you'd like to add to what she just said?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're back to your point, I think what this is suggesting is that brands are not dead, that there's a window right now where, because of this focus on consumer trust, that brands have the opportunity to ensure that they represent themselves in the best way possible. So just to give you an example, if you're a beauty player, if you're L'Oreal or Estee Lauder, etc., and you have a consumer going on your site and interacting, you have the rich depth of all of the specific product information about your entire portfolio that can really ensure that you're tailoring your recommendation to the specifics of what that consumer wants. That's much harder to do on a generalized platform. So if you can provide that precision level of advice, that precision level of guidance, consumers are saying that today they would have that preference, but you've got to be able to be organized to be able to operate in that way. So there is this absolute window where brands have that opportunity to capitalize on the trust that Jen described, but they've got to get after it quickly.
Well, you both have been wonderful digital companions for the past hour or so. What I would love to do right now is give you the final word. Oliver, why don't you take a few seconds? Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you think is vital to the conversation?
I think there's a couple of things. One, I think there's a headline message that we see this as driving the biggest shift in what, where, and when consumers buy that we have seen. because as we've said, this is going to be about persuading the biggest change in persuading consumers to make different consumption decisions than they have made before. And I think that profound shift is what's really exercising C-suite folks that we talk to. I think the other big takeaway from my perspective is this hope that it is going to drive a world of better consumption. But what that means for companies is that areas where they've historically been able to generate profits that have either come from a consumer perhaps not investing the time in switching from one utility to provider to another, or from one grocery player to another, what agents are going to do is enable consumers to be able to make those switches. And so this will drive an increased level to which the industry, the consumer industry as a whole, needs to be able to react to that, because there will be otherwise a movement of profitability in effect from the company to the pockets of the consumer as a result of this thing. So there's a huge potential opportunity for better consumption from consumers, and that includes healthier consumption as well. I think that's something that Jen commented on. But it's also a watch out for companies where if they've got something where they know that it's probably not the best quality equation and they've been trading on that, AI is coming. One other thing that we're looking at with the research going forward, thinking about what's happening over the next 5 to 10 years, is how this is going to start to change human to human interaction as well. Because what's emerging from our research is the degree to which consumers are using this, not just to enhance the quality of their shopping and their consumption decisions, but also thinking more about how can they enhance the quality of their relationships and their interactions with other humans. So examples of this are things like, how can I best persuade my 14-year-old to do something? Or if I'm trying to communicate with someone that I find difficult to access, how can I best convince them and interact with them as well? So this degree to which we're seeing people starting to use AI more and more and more as a point of reference, as a point of helping to improve the quality of interaction, is something that we're looking at. Also, as we think about people having a digital companion to support them, clearly we're going to see those companions talking to each other to enhance the quality of social interaction and social experience. So both we're optimistic about what this means for consumption. We're also cautiously optimistic about what this means for social interaction going forward. So a couple of things that we're really drilling into in our research that will come through the next consumer pulse.
And I think this is a really exciting space, and it can sound like science fiction, but we already found in our study this year that 27% of active users told us that they would like for AI to act as a filter in their real everyday conversations with people. I can't tell you how useful I would find that. Me and my husband already say to each other, we wish that our AI agents would just chat to each other and have conversations on our behalf. So I think this is a really interesting space. I think wearables might be an interesting component of this. We already see some players starting to think about how wearables interact in the space. A lot more to come, a lot of interesting ideas. And Oliver, I think we are going to be busy with a lot more topics to explore over the coming years.
Yeah, it's a really exciting time to come.
I will say it does really feel like science fiction sometimes. And it's great that you all put together reports like Talk to My AI Agent, the new rules of brand value, to help us understand this and to make it real. Talking to people and getting actual answers from people, I think, is really going to be helpful in this next stage. So for anyone who's interested in this research, I urge you to go to accenture.com/research. Jen, Oliver, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. I'm Juan Martinez, Senior Editor at Harvard Business Review, and this has been the Accenture Research Executive Briefing. Have a great day.